Hello, my name's Christopher Anatra. I'm the consciousness within the human DNA holographic avatar you know as the Quantum Businessman. Welcome, you lucid dreamwalker, seeker of knowledge, to Symphony of Realities, Act 7, Concepts, Scene 2, Flipping the Chessboard. Concept number 5. What about this flipping the chessboard concept? Timeline brand takeovers. Let's talk about the concept of timeline brand takeovers, such as what happened to STOUFFER'S Stove Top Stuffing. By the way, have you noticed that Kraft has removed their logo from the stovetop stuffing box? Perhaps a certain HBO show that I was on where I spoke about this topic had something to do with that.
I specifically remember this being called STOUFFER'S Stove Top Stuffing, but it's always been now Kraft Stovetop Stuffing. And it's always been that way. It wasn't from the 1970s, it's always been Kraft. But I remember the commercials, I remember everything about being it called STOUFFER'S Stovetop Stuffing.
By the way, if you happen to watch that episode on HBO, the way it is described that I met the creator of that series is totally inaccurate.
Guy you meet in the supermarket, who then you learn has this amazing, and we don't have time to get into it, but people must watch this episode where he speaks about the Mandela effect, which is, again, will take too long to explain, and you wind up going to Idaho to a convention that it seems to be running. Was he just in the supermarket?
Yeah, I mean, he was in the Stop and Shop, and I had no idea about the Mandela Effect conference.
There was some significant video editing done, but I was happy to get the message out about the Mandela Effect to a larger audience. What is a timeline brand takeover? It's when a successful product or idea is stolen from its creator and given to another by stitching into the reality a false timeline. First, besides profits, what other reason would Kraft have to claim stovetop stuffing? The answer is Thanksgiving and stealing the light from families who celebrate Thanksgiving together. When families come together, even if they all don't always get along, they create a special type of light. A type of light which is very valuable, especially to those of a negative polarity who are running out of light as their reserves near empty. Thanksgiving in the United States is one of those special times families come together to enjoy a special meal and time with each other. What is one consistent part of Thanksgiving dinner that is usually the same source? The stuffing, specifically stovetop stuffing. How can this light be stolen from eating stuffing? From its ingredients, specifically genetically modified ingredients, food additives, artificial trans fat, and BHA and BHT chemicals, stovetop stuffing is actually one of the most unhealthy foods you could consume. Is it possible that these genetically modified ingredients' purpose is to capture the light from families and siphon it off to another location? So what's going on? Is more than just Kraft involved? From what I read, yes. The other player is CERN, the Cyclotron Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland. Is it possible that for a time period, CERN had what I call stolen authority to manifest Mandela effects, to make timeline insertions? Some of you might remember the cryptic message and photographs from CERN that they were responsible for Mandela effects. When I look at that scientist at CERN's office, the first thing I think of is that he needs to clean up his desk. Maybe he should Mandela effect a clean desk and document scanner. Just saying. Is it possible that CERN, hungry for light, made a deal with Kraft? A deal where Kraft would own and receive all the profits from stovetop stuffing, and in return, special genetically modified ingredients would be included in the stuffing mix so that CERN could siphon off the light of families. Remember that everything is frequency, including the food, drugs, and nutritional supplements we consume. The frequency of food affects the frequency of our body. So would it be possible for the frequency of genetically modified ingredients to divert light from someone consuming those genetically modified ingredients to another frequency. Similar to typing a web address in your browser, taking you to that server for the information in a web page you requested, regardless of where it is in the world. The statue of the Hindu god Shiva, located at CERN, represents stolen authority over him. Shiva is the god of destruction and time. Shiva wants nothing to do with CERN, and at some point soon will claim his authority back. I've noticed that other Hadron Particle Collider locations also will have statues of gods or demigods, and even obelisks. Cornell University in Ithaca, New York has a Hadron Collider, pronounced Caesar, which is located 40 feet beneath the football field at their Ithaca campus. Cornell also has a statue of Hercules, perhaps for strength. Think about this. Why would these centers of science include statues of gods and demigods? What does that tell us? Does it tell us that they might be real? At the Fermilab Particle Accelerator in Illinois, USA, there is a three-sided hyperbolic obelisk that perhaps acts as what's called a cone of power. You might think of CERN's Cyclotron Large Hadron Collider as a technological magic circle. A magic circle is a circle of space marked out by practitioners of some branches of ritual magic.
Crowley is currently stuck in a traffic jam as he tries to get out of London to find Adam.
And it's official. This is the biggest traffic jam in England's history.
Why?
What you did to the M25 was a stroke of demonic genius, darling.
Oh, no.
The traffic jam is being caused by problems on the M25, the freeway that circles London. Crowley had a lot to do with the design of the M25 back in the 1970s.
So, thanks to 3 computer hacks, selective bribery, and me moving some markers across the field one night, the M25 London Orbital Motorway, which was supposed to look like this, will, when it opens in 1986, actually look like this and represent the dread sigil Odegra in the language of the dark priesthood of ancient Mu. Odegra means, hail the great beast, devourer of worlds. Can I hear a wahoo? Once it's built, the millions of motorists who grumble their way around it are going to be like water on a prayer wheel, grinding out an endless fog of low-grade evil that will encircle the whole of London. Yes, Duke has to.
What's a computer?
Circles are believed by ritual magicians to form a protective barrier between themselves and what they summon. In the 2016 movie Doctor Strange, magicians are taught to create portals for travel through the magic circles they create.
Come with me.
Wait, is this?
Everest.
Yeah, right. Beautiful.
The circle can contain what's called a cone of power. It's a method of raising energy in ritual magic. Perhaps that obelisk at Fermilab serves that same purpose. These magic circles, including the technological kind, can be used for light or dark. Currently, it appears that CERN is overtaken by the dark. Around the world, it appears there are as many as 1,500 cyclotrons operating, with the cover story about the scientific research that they're doing. Many of the scientists at these cyclotrons are legitimate and have no idea about their other uses. They all appear to be connected and work in sync with CERN. I'll leave a link to a website where you can locate all the cyclotrons around the world for your own investigation. One I wanted to note is the cyclotron located at Brookhaven, Long Island, New York. It could be called a light source cyclotron. Its primary purpose appears to be sending out data to create false realities, false holograms. Why? To create confusion, to create chaos, projecting elaborate holographic inserts with fake virtual reality images.
I don't care. I'd rather be here in spirit than not at all. A captain doesn't abandon ship.
Every hour you stay here makes it that much more difficult to leave.
Why are you pushing me? I've made up my mind. I'm staying here.
The cortical stimulator is working. I'm getting a weak pulse.
She's coming back.
I'll use cordrazine along with the stimulator.
What was that? What happened?
What do you mean?
I saw Tuvok and Chakotay and the doctor.
Here?
No, it was different, as though I were looking up at them.
An hallucination like the others.
Oh, it didn't feel like the others. I didn't see myself. I was looking up at them. That's the real me, isn't it? Lying on the ground on that planet, dying. And this is the hallucination. This isn't real.
More denial. You're only making it harder on yourself.
You're trying very hard to convince me to come with you. Why is that? If what you're saying is true, why not let me come to the decision on my own?
I'm trying to spare you unnecessary pain.
My father would never act like this. He always believed I had to learn my own lessons, make my own mistakes. He never tried to shield me from life. Why would he try to shield me from death? You're not my father. I could be imagining you, but I don't think so. You have such a specific agenda. You're determined that I go with you somewhere. Who are you?
I'm trying to help you. Stop fighting me.
Are you an alien being of some kind? Is that it?
Her eyes are open.
Vital signs are responding. Blood pressure 60/30.
But the entity is still inhabiting her cerebral cortex, impeding your treatment.
Catherine, hang on. We're bringing you back. Just fight a little longer.
Direct synaptic stimulation might drive out the alien presence.
I was right. I heard Tuvok and Chakotay and the doctor. You're an alien. You've created all these hallucinations, haven't you?
This is what my species does. At the moment just before death, one of us comes to help you understand what's happening, to make the crossing over an occasion of joy.
And what is that?
Our matrix, where your consciousness will live. I was being truthful when I said it was a place of wonder. It can be whatever you want it to be.
Then why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? Why pretend to be my father?
Usually people are comforted to see their loved ones. It makes the crossing over a much less fearful occasion. I've done this many times, but I've never encountered someone so resistant.
Something's happening. The alien presence is getting stronger again.
Fight it, Catherine. Fight it just a little longer.
I'll have to try a Thoron pulse.
My people are telling me to fight. They're trying to save me.
They're trying out of desperation. It's hopeless.
You're the one who sounds desperate. I don't get the feeling you're trying to make me comfortable. You're only interested in my agreeing to come with you.
Because it's inevitable.
And you don't strike me as any kind of good Samaritan. You're more like a vulture, preying on people at the moment of their death when they're most vulnerable.
I've waited for you. I've been patient.
But your patience is wearing thin. What's the real reason you want me in that matrix? Somehow I don't think it has anything to do with everlasting joy.
You must go with me.
If you could force me to go, you'd have done it already. You need me to agree, don't you? I have to go voluntarily.
Wouldn't that be better than standing here in this endless debate?
Let me tell you this. We can stand here for all eternity, and I will never choose to go with you.
You're in a dangerous profession, Captain. You face death every day. There'll be another time, and I'll be waiting. Eventually, you'll come into my matrix. And you will nourish me for a long, long time.
Go back to hell, coward.
It will be a relief for Earth and humanity when all of these cyclotrons get shut down and dismantled. There is no possibility for their existence in the golden timeline, the age of truth. What about this massive cyclotron magic circle in Cupertino, California? Wait, that's the headquarters of Apple Computer, known as Apple Park, in the shape of a cyclotron and magic circle. One should note that CERN does serve a purpose for Earth. You can think of one of the abilities of CERN is that it can act like an electric fence. a way to prevent certain beings from escaping from Earth. Beings who have made a karmic mess and need to stay until the damage they cause is balanced. It's also directly related to these, the Terracotta warriors of China, the bounty hunters for Earth. Every Terracotta warrior is unique.
In this particular case, I'm going to have a bit of a Reservoir Dogs moment and slice off the ear of the warrior so it could be compared to some others.
The results are startling and clear.
Here I've got some of the ears that we modeled, and you can see just visually that there's a great deal of difference between those ears. For example, in the degree to which they've got a pronounced ear lobe, the depth of the well in the middle of the ear. You can see, for example, that this ear, and perhaps that ear, they're a little bit more similar with one another. But that ear and that ear, very different. What we've discovered so far through these 3D models is that no two ears are demonstrably the same. In fact, that's something we might expect in the real world too. These warriors seem to be very individual. Whether they are portraits of actual people in the past, as some people have suggested, we're not sure, but certainly they've been made in a way which makes them seem individual in the same way as a typical human population.
It seems the Emperor demanded to be defended in the afterlife by a real army of individuals.
They all have different facial features, and even the horses are unique. Could it be that these are no ordinary statues? Is it possible that modern archaeology doesn't understand their true story? Perhaps they are what remains of a psychic tracker bounty hunting army for Earth. Perhaps they were defenders for Earth. They could be invoked as protectors if an off-world species tried to invade or steal their human DNA avatar technology. Terracotta means glazed pottery made from Earth, the clay of Earth. I personally saw some of the Terracotta warriors when the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia had a special exhibit for them. They are tall and all over 6 feet. Some are as tall as 6 feet 5 inches or 2 meters. Modern archaeologists say that they are Chinese and are protecting the tomb of the first emperor of China. Let me propose another perspective from the Akashic records. Not Chinese, but Mongolian. Perhaps they were time-traveling bounty hunter defenders of Earth. Perhaps Terracotta warriors were not always Mongolian, but could be of any genetic race. Interestingly, the terracotta were discovered in 1974 by a Chinese farmer digging in his field.
During a drought in Shaanxi province. Local farmer Mr. Yang and some other fruit growers became desperate for water and started digging a well. As he tells historian Jonathan Clements.
那一天天气非常好，我拿镢头在搜，周围搜就挖着，这肩膀、胸部，一镢头就挖到挖人这个脖子孔上。我给我同伴说是这是野苗。
You might wonder why they were not discovered sooner. They were there for thousands of years. CERN first went online in 1971 as the world's first Large Hadron Collider. The CERN electric fence, as I'll call it, to keep the bad guys from escaping without paying their karmic debt, went online in 1971, and a few years later, the terracotta were discovered. Perhaps once CERN went online, their mission was completed. Perhaps they all then time-traveled and assembled to the location they are now found at least 2,200 years in the past.
Prior to this point in time, somewhere in the past, the timeline skewed into this tangent, creating an alternate 1985. Alternate to you, me, and Einstein, but reality for everyone else.
Perhaps someday they might rise again. Maybe, just maybe, you had no idea you could learn so much from stovetop stuffing. can't be, but somehow is. My advice, when it comes to Thanksgiving, skip the stovetop and go for homemade stuffing infused with love. This was not a good chess move for Kraft or CERN, especially because this is one of the most resonating negative Mandela timeline insertions that most people agree on. Do you remember STOUFFER'S Stove Top Stuffing? Concept number 6. What about this flipping the chessboard concept? Mandela effects and timeline insertions. For myself, and possibly you, this journey of revelations began, or at least was influenced by the Mandela effect. What is the Mandela effect? Mandela effects are like Easter eggs in a video game. They are hints and wonderful surprises that we have experienced a timeline shift. Mandela effects show us that what we believe to be reality is not exactly reality. Because if this reality was true and unchanging, we wouldn't have Mandela effects. Mandela effects show us that we have raised our frequency just enough to have navigated into higher frequency bandwidth timelines of our reality, where things are not exactly the same as in a lower frequency timeline. Mandela effects include everything, including the geography of Earth, history, animals, or what I call mandanimals, the spelling of names of famous people, locations, books, and even popular food items like Haas avocados have changed to Haas, or Grand Central Station in Manhattan being called Grand Central Terminal since the 1920s. What about the Addams Family TV series? Do you remember Addams being spelled with one D or two? The two Ds just looks wrong and goes against my memory of watching that show as a kid hundreds of times. Famous art, such as American Gothic, changing from the farmer and his wife to the farmer and his daughter. Like many people, I remember his wife with her gray hair and bonnet looking straight ahead like her husband, and not the daughter looking off to the side with her blonde hair and blue eyes. People are alive who many remember dying in the past. This becomes especially shocking when we discover when they recently die. And our human avatar body itself is changing, or should I say upgrading, such as the heart now in the center of our chest, so it can pump blood evenly throughout our body. Many of us were taught that the heart was on the left of our chest. It's even where we place our hand when saying the Pledge of Allegiance, to state an oath to obey the government, and that blood pressure should be taken from the left arm. However, now you can take your blood pressure from either arm. If you were to ask the scientific community what the Mandela effect is, they would gaslight you and tell you that you are misremembering. There is no such thing as a Mandela effect, and you are confabulating. I'm here to tell you that they are wrong, completely wrong, and purposefully misleading you. The Mandela effect is not just a pop culture phenomena. It's actually the most significant phenomenon of our times, which is completely ignored by modern day science. Science, which in our reality has become a religion to its followers. The Mandela effect pulls back the veils of what reality is and how our consciousness operates, and introduces us to the concept of timeline insertions. Timeline insertions can get messy, what I call a hairball of timelines, when there are many competing chess moves made to change an outcome. Timeline insertions can be negative or positive in the same way a chess player makes moves to win a game. Mandela effects are the consequences of a timeline insertion to show those that are observant that a different timeline has been stitched in by those that are manipulating the natural order. Think about this. Remember how in the Napoleon Symphony of Realities episode I showed that a change in the weather, specifically all the heavy rains caused by the volcanic eruption of Mount Tambora, caused Napoleon's cannons to be stuck in the mud at the Battle of Waterloo. Napoleon was a master strategist at moving his cannons and artillery quickly, but when they were stuck in the mud, it cost him the battle. Think about this. What if on the day of the JFK assassination, it was raining? The top to the limo would have been up, and JFK would probably not have been shot and killed that day. Just a change in the weather can affect an outcome. Even if it wasn't raining, how could Oswald have known that the top of Kennedy's motorcade car would be off that day? He couldn't have. What can dramatically change or manipulate the weather, such as influencing a volcanic eruption? Control rooms that are chess-moving events on the surface. The JFK assassination Mandela effect is the first one that really affected me. I knew the Zapruder film really well, and when the number of people in the limo changed from 4 to 6, as well as many other details, I seriously began to question reality. When it comes to JFK, there has been a recent influx of new Mandela effects that I've noticed, at least for myself, maybe even you. Have you ever heard of Kick Kennedy, JFK's little sister? She was a kick. She was a free spirit who was admired by many and was on track to have an amazing life when it was cut short by tragedy.
She was a high-spirited and rebellious young woman. Now we're learning new details into Kathleen Kennedy's life and death. Kick, as she was called, was the second daughter of Rose and Joe Kennedy. She was also John F. Kennedy's sister. She defied her Catholic family to marry a Protestant British aristocrat who later died in World War II just a few months after their wedding. Now a widow, she eventually fell in love again, but this time to a married man, detailed in this new biography by Barbara Leeming. Kit's mother forbid her to marry a divorced man and was cut off from the family. She was then tragically killed in a plane crash alongside her new lover, but sadly, the Kennedys made no move to claim her remains. Only her father attended the funeral.
One of the Mandela effects I've been noting is that when we move into higher frequency timelines, there appears to be more family members. Besides Kick Kennedy, in my Napoleon Symphony of Realities episodes, I noted that he now has 3 sons. One was considered legitimate, while the other 2 were not. Another interesting example is Alexander the Great. I was always taught that he was an only child. However, in our current timeline, he has 6 siblings. Alexander had 2 half-brothers, 3 half-sisters, and 1 full sister known as the Cleopatra of Macedonia. Is Alexander the Great being one of 7 children a Mandela effect for you? It's not just families growing. Did you know that there are now 2 other Zapruder-type films of the JFK assassination? The second one is called the Orville Nix film. Orville filmed this from the opposite side of the street as Zapruder's film and gives us more details about the grassy knoll.
Orville Nix took 8mm movie film of the assassination, of the shooting, from the center of Dealey Plaza.
Standing on the corner of Main and Houston. They're taking pictures before the assassination and during the assassination.
He didn't think much of it. He had a lot of film left, so he just left the film in his camera and went off. He photographed a high school football game the next weekend.
His filming of the shooting, which only captured the last few seconds, is considered to be nearly as important as the Zapruder film. Orville provided his film to the FBI and claimed that they removed most of what he filmed and that the gunshots came from the area that was called the grassy knoll.
Well, you now have a copy of your film, which you were kind enough to show to us this afternoon. Is that copy the same as the original which you gave to the FBI on December 1st?
I would say no. There is some films may be missing some frames. Some of the frames were ruined.
Does the film which you have at the present time have the same number of frames as the film which you delivered to the FBI on December 1st?
I would say no, but it's because of losing maybe a frame here and there.
At the time the shots were fired, did you look at the book depository building?
No.
Did you think at that time that the shots came from the book depository building?
No, I thought it came from a fence between the book depository and the railroad track.
Did anyone else who you know or who you've spoken with also believe that the shots came from there?
Most everyone thought it came from the fence behind the book depository.
Is the Orville Nix film a Mandela effect for you? But wait, there's more. Much more. While I was creating this episode of Symphony of Realities, yet another Zapruder-type film came onto the timeline for me. This is called the Marie Muchmore film. Yes, her last name is Muchmore, and her short film continues the concept of much more information about the JFK assassination being revealed in this age of truth. Marie Muchmore made a color 8mm film which became one of the primary documents of the assassination.
For example, Mary Muchmore is taking 8mm movie film, not from the Zapruder side, from the other side. It gets shown on TV in New York, where an FBI agent sees it. Says, oh, the Bureau doesn't know anything about this film. Could we get a copy?
The Muchmore film, with other 8mm films taken by Zapruder and Nix, was used by the Warren Commission to investigate the assassination. Is the JFK assassination Muchmore film a Mandela effect for you? Are these 3 films of the assassination a Mandela effect for you? But wait, there's more. How about some more, man? Specifically the Polaroid taken by Marianne Moorman, the instant the president was shot with the first bullet. When you watch this next video clip, note the direction of Kennedy's head. It's sideways, as if the bullet came from the grassy knoll.
My son was in school and I had told him, you can't be out of school, but I'll take a picture for you. Never dreaming that that picture would be part of history.
Moorman, shown here in a still frame of the home movie famously shot by Abraham Zapruder, took just one photograph of the president that day. A grainy Polaroid snapped right as the presidential limousine was passing by.
As the car got closer to us, I stepped closer to the curb here, and Jean was yelling, "Mr. President, look this way." And when I put the camera up to my face, I wanted to make sure it was as close as I could get to him. And I snapped the picture, looking through the viewfinder, of course.
When the photo was developed, it became clear Moorman had pressed the shutter just as the 46-year-old president was hit and fatally wounded by a rifle's bullet. It's the only known photograph of the moment the president was struck that also captures the grassy knoll, an image studied endlessly over the years to determine if another shooter was there.
Is the only photograph taken at the exact moment JFK was hit a Mandela effect for you? The JFK assassination event is one of those hairball of timeline chess move events, like the sinking of the Titanic and even the fall of the Twin Towers on September 11th, 2001. For example, was Lee Harvey Oswald, the lone gunman as he's called, was he married? Yes! Is that a Mandela effect for you? How many children did he have? He had 2 baby girls. Is that a Mandela effect for you? Did he have a moment of fame before the JFK assassination? Yes, he did. A few months before JFK was assassinated, he was on the evening news in New Orleans.
Driving to work one morning, and I saw a man who was passing out handbills in front of the International Trade Mart, and I got to the office at Channel 6, And Bern Rotman, I believe, was the Simon editor then, and he said there was this guy down there passing out handbills, fair play for Cuba. And I said, yeah, that must have been the guy I saw. So we covered him on TV, and then we brought him into the station, and all of us chatted with him briefly, and Bill Slatter did the interview with Oswald.
But are you a Marxist? I think you did admit on an earlier radio interview that you consider yourself a Marxist.
Well, I would very definitely say that I am a Marxist. That is correct. But that does not mean, however, that I'm a communist.
Is that a Mandela effect for you? It's also the perfect setup for a patsy to take the blame.
One statement, please. I'd like some legal representation. These police officers have not allowed me to have any. I don't know what this is all about.
Kill the president?
No, sir, I didn't. People keep asking me that. Sir?
Did you shoot the president?
I work in that building.
Were you in the building at the time?
Naturally, if I work in that building, yes, sir.
Back up, man. Did you shoot the president?
No, they're taking me in because of the fact that I lived in the Soviet Union. I'm just a patsy.
What about the famous conspiracy theory that Lyndon Johnson, who was in the limo behind JFK, being seen listening on a walkie-talkie and then ducking down before the first shot?
So this then represents what I believe is what we should have seen if LBJ were sitting there. He's not. He's hunched over. He's gone. The brown blob that I put in, that colorized, I believe is his jacket with him hunched over. He cannot be leaning over to the right. It doesn't make any sense. The glasses aren't there. You'd see his shoulders. The physics of it just don't work. LBJ ducked, no doubt.
Is Lyndon Johnson ducking down right before the first gunshot a new conspiracy theory for you? Does it indicate that he was aware of what was about to happen? With all the new details about the JFK assassination now being revealed as timelines are collapsed and merged, it's providing more and more evidence of what actually happened in this golden timeline and age of truth. There's that old joke that says, two chickens were talking to each other. One chicken says to the other, I think those humans are going to kill and eat us. The other chicken says, oh, Bob, you and your conspiracy theories. With these JFK Mandela effects, I'm not promoting any conspiracy theories, but if I did, from what I read in the Akashic Records, you'd see a group effort that involved the CIA, the FBI, the Mafia, Jack Ruby, Lyndon B. Johnson, Hitman Harrelson, actor Woody Harrelson's father, the gunman behind the fence on the grassy knoll, and that Lee Harvey Oswald was indeed a patsy and took all the blame. Can't be, but somehow is. What do the Akashic Records say about the soul spark of JFK? This is very high-level and camouflaged Akashic information, but I've received the clearance to tell you. It appears that JFK was mer-person royalty, a king. His wife, Jacqueline, was his mermaid wife, his queen. They both ruled a kingdom located in the Indian Ocean and were very loved and respected. They were mer people. Did you have any idea about that? They also appear to have a close connection to dolphins, from what I observe in the Akashic Records. Perhaps, if you felt a connection to JFK and Jackie, you may have known them from another life, perhaps under the ocean. History is filled with Mandela effects. Here's an example of another new one to enter our reality. Have you heard of the United States female domestic terrorist group known as M19 in the 1980s that were blowing up US government and military buildings, including an FBI office, Fort McNair, and the Washington Navy Yard Computer Center and the Washington Navy Yard Officers Club, and the list goes on.
This tiny band of lifelong militants decided to wage a war against their own country. This group was founded and led by women. They are unique in American history. May 19th was a women-led violent extremist group that sought to overthrow colonialism and imperialism, both at home and abroad, formed by a group of well-educated, middle-class women in the late 1970s. They decided to target what they considered to be imperialism directly. So they bombed an FBI field office in New York. They bombed Fort McNair in Washington, specifically the National War College. They bombed the Washington Navy Yard twice. They bombed the police union headquarters in New York. And as probably their most infamous bombing act, on November 7th, 1983, they bombed the U.S. Capitol, causing roughly $1 million worth of damage.
The women of M19 were even involved in breaking a bomb maker out of a New York State prison. And then they bombed the Senate in Washington, D.C. in November of 1983, a year before Ronald Reagan was re-elected as president, perhaps to affect the election of 1984. In 2020, author William Rosenau wrote a book based upon court records he discovered about the 1983 bombing of the U.S. Senate. He gave a presentation about his book at the U.S. National Archives in Washington, D.C. on January 16, 2020, where he talks about this forgotten part of U.S. history. By the way, anytime you hear modern history referred to as forgotten, that's usually a clue that it might be a Mandela effect.
And the title of my book suggests what happened in November 7th, evening of November 7th, 1983, when they bombed the U.S. Capitol outside of the Majority Leader's office. They also they bombed an FBI field office in New York. They bombed the Navy Yard twice. Other targets, the Israeli Aircraft Industry Association in New York, the South African Consulate in New York, and the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association in New York. And all of this was to protest things as varied as the U.S. invasion of Grenada, apartheid in South Africa, the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, and the U.S. backing for the Contras and the regime in El Salvador.
Haven't heard of M19, the first and only domestic United States terrorist group founded and led by women? Haven't heard of the 1983 Senate bombing that caused $1 million in damage? Neither did the audience where author William Rosenau gave his presentation.
So I must have been out of touch. Did the bomb go off in the U.S. Capitol? Where was it?
It went off on the second floor. It went off about 11:30 at night. The Senate was not in session, but it could have been. Interestingly, so it created about $1 million worth of damage, blew a massive, huge crater in the wall.
Don't worry, because it appears that then President Ronald Reagan in 1983 or ever knew about it either. I've been scouring through all the speeches in the Reagan Library radio and TV broadcasts, and he appears to never mention the Senate bombing or the female terrorist group named M19 or their eventual capture in 1985 after they bombed the Policemen's Benevolent Association in New York City. Besides a photo and short statements in newspapers, the only recording of their terrorist activity is in court records. It's really difficult to find this covered by anyone or any news organization, especially before 2020. Even William Rosenau was surprised that only court records is where you could discover that the M19 female terrorist group even existed.
How important these court records are, these federal court records are for the understanding of terrorism and political violence, at least in those cases where it wound up with prosecutions. And I've never gotten a solid answer to this, but terrorism researchers have tended to ignore these court records. But they go far beyond transcripts. And even, I suppose one of the most just valuable things were the items entered into as evidence. So internal documents from the group, diagrams, bomb making plans, just incredible stuff.
Why would terrorism researchers ignore these court records? Perhaps M19 didn't exist in previous timelines. Was the government trying to cover it up? Could time travel be involved? Interestingly, one of the members of M19, Susan Rosenberg, was pardoned by Bill Clinton on his last day of office. She later joined a group named Thousand Currents, which provided fundraising for the Black Lives Matter global movement. When I see photographs of Susan Rosenberg and the other members of M19, I pick up time travel residue on them, similar to those kids on the orphan trains during the 1800s and early 1900s in the United States. You can learn more about the orphan trains and their link to Tartarian time travelers from the future in my Symphony of Realities video titled Time Traveling Babies. I'll leave a link below. In that episode, I explain the concept of wars of the future will be fought in the past. Remember this scene from the TV show The 4400?
Mr. Collier, you've been doing quite a bit of press since your resurrection. I suppose some people are calling it that. And in every interview, you've been making the same statement over and over again.
The war for the future will be fought in the past.
Exactly. And by past, do you mean now, today?
It's our shared burden, yes.
And this war, it's one between the 4400s and the non-4400s?
No. This is a war between good and evil. And it has already started. Good people, 4400s, non-4400s.
Come on, Kyle. Dinner's ready.
Have already
I'll be right there.
Incredible sacrifices. And they know they will be called on to sacrifice even more. They're among the first to know the cost of this struggle because, for better or worse, all our lives are different now, profoundly different. That's what wars do. They change us. But the stakes, well, the stakes are nothing less than the fate of mankind.
The concept is that you can change the future by changing the past. In that photo of President Clinton with one of the M19 terrorists, I also pick up very strongly time travel residue on Clinton. From what I am discovering, not only are presidents selected and not elected, they are involved with time travel. Could this forgotten history of the United States be the result of a negative timeline insertion or time travel? If it was time travel, why the forgotten history until just the last few years? Wouldn't it affect all the timelines? Not necessarily. Perhaps it was time travel to a specific timeline branch. Perhaps a timeline whose partial aspects have just recently merged into our current timeline. A strategic chess move. That could explain why everyone from President Reagan to those who document and study terrorist activities never mention M19. It's as though they never existed. With that said, it should be noted that at least President Clinton knew about the M19 female terrorist group. If it was a strategic timeline insertion and time travel chess move, what are the factions involved? Perhaps the World Communist Revolution, specifically Communist Party USA. Were you aware that in the United States, besides the political parties of Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, etc., there is a Communist Party which was founded in 1919?
But most Americans have very little understanding of what a Communist Party is or how many there are in the United States or what impact they have. Today I'm going to do a rundown. I'm going to give a list of the main communist organizations in the United States, what they do, and a little bit about their impact. Now I'm going to start with Communist Party USA. This is the premier communist party in the country. It was founded in 1919 in Chicago. It built tremendous strength during World War II. It was over 100,000 members. It had helped to infiltrate 400 spies into the Roosevelt administration. It helped to start organizations like the United Nations, the World Bank, etc., and some of the massive social programs that have been crippling America ever since. So it was very influential in the day, but it still is. It had another burst during the Vietnam War era. It died away a little bit in the 90s, and now it's coming back. A few years ago it had 5,000 members. I estimate it's quite a few more now. They're consolidating, they've restarted the Young Communist League, they're active in virtually every state in the Union, and very well infiltrated into the Democratic Party.
Just so you know, when it comes to politics and governments, I don't take sides. I think they're all corrupt. So don't interpret this info as myself taking a political side. Although there may be a few rare politicians that are really trying to do good, I don't and I won't take sides. If you were to scale the consciousness level of humanity between a 1 and a 10, with 10 being the highest consciousness level, the honest answer is that humanity is a 0. Completely blue-pilled, as they would say in the Matrix movies. Blue-pilled and completely absorbed in the Matrix.
The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Were you listening to me, Neo? Or were you looking at the woman in the red dress? I was. Look again. Freeze it.
This isn't the Matrix.
No. It's another training program designed to teach you one thing. If you are not one of us, you are one of them.
Most of our society is not ready to be unplugged. They are so hopelessly dependent on the system that they will fight to keep the negative matrix running. In a society that's at a level 0 consciousness, corruption would be the norm. We won't see real advancements on our planet until humanity ascends to the next level of consciousness, which I believe is coming very soon. When that happens, the world will wake up very quickly to things such as the fiat currencies of the world governments, especially the US dollar, really have no value. It's a monopoly money Ponzi scheme that would never work in a level 1 society. Many people have known about this for many years, but the monopoly money is still used and people will actually kill each other over it, over this fiat or fake money. Why? It's called the Babylonian money magic spell. It's an actual spell cast over fake money to give it the illusion of worth when it really has 0 value. What kind of currencies will we have in the future? My opinion, and I'm not giving financial advice, is that cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and a few others will replace the monetary systems of the governments. Cryptocurrencies will really be accepted and used once we raise our consciousness level. Back to politics. Did you know there was an official Communist Party in the United States? The Democratic Socialists of America.
Democratic Socialists of America, the largest Marxist group in this country by far. They claim about 90,000 members. Many of them are just paper members that don't do much. There's probably a hardcore of about 15 to 20,000. But they're active in every state. They have people in state legislatures as Democrats, New Hampshire and Massachusetts and New York and Texas, Georgia and California and Arizona and many other states.
I'll leave a link below if you'd like to watch the entire video by Trevor Loudon. By the way, his higher self likes to trade, and he's got some good crown technology that your higher self can trade with him for. Could the M19 female terrorist group just be the tip of the iceberg of timeline insertions and time travel to help make the United States similar to communist China? The Chinese military has been known to use time travel technology, specifically with the Tank Man Mandela effect from the Tiananmen Square protests in Beijing, China. Tank Man is the name given to the unidentified Chinese man who stood in front of a column of tanks leaving Tiananmen Square on June 5th, 1989, the day after the Chinese military had suppressed the Tiananmen Square protests by force.
After hours of shooting and facing a line of troops, the crowd is still here. They're shouting, "Stop the killing and down with the government." A huge volley of shots just as I left the front line caused panic. The young man in front of me fell dead. I fell over him. 2 others were killed yards away. 2 more people lay wounded on the ground near me. Ambulances screamed up to the troop line and were turned away. They couldn't get to the square. 2 ambulance drivers were shot and injured. Earlier, we'd been driving at the back of the Forbidden City, the old part of Peking, near the square. We picked up a woman with a bullet in the head and took her to the nearby children's hospital, into a scene of near mayhem. Casualties were arriving every few seconds, on bikes, rickshaws, park benches, carried in, all with gunshot wounds. Housewives, elderly residents, people shot while sitting in their homes. The operating theatre was overflowing, many of the staff in tears. In 20 minutes, 40 seriously injured were brought for emergency surgery. 2 were already dead. In the streets, many came up to us, shaking with anger and disbelief and fear. Many were terrified, saying there would be retribution. There was not one voice on the streets which did not express despair and rage. Tell the world, they said to us.
I remember when this film was smuggled out of China and watched, Tank Man got killed by the tank. It ran him over. It crushed him. Everyone that watched that film was affected by it. Tank Man caused a revolution in China and showed the world that one man could make a difference. China became a democracy in that timeline after riots and protests for weeks. China formed a constitution like the United States. It allowed voting by its people. I remember that China became a democracy in my old timeline. But now, in this timeline, Tank Man is not killed. He just plays chicken with the tank. He jumps on the tank. I think he exchanges a recipe with the tank driver, and then he goes home. Could time travel and timeline insertions be at play now to turn the United States and other nations to communism or socialism? Look at the evidence and you can decide. You might be wondering, why bombing the Capitol? Does bombing or other types of destruction affect the unseen world? First, consider this. Did you know that in 1915, the Senate reception room was bombed by a Harvard professor protesting World War I?
In 1915, several sticks of dynamite exploded in the Senate reception room when a German-born professor at Harvard set off the blast to protest World War I.
Did you know that in 1971, the United States Capitol was bombed by a group known as the Weather Underground to protest the Vietnam War?
Then in 1971,
at 1 minute before 1 o'clock this morning, the switchboard at the Capitol received a phone call. A man's voice said a bomb would go off in the building in half an hour. At 1:30 in the morning, it did.
Police did their best to keep the Capitol under tight security today, with checkpoints set up to examine packages and briefcases.
The bomb, apparently planted by a group or person protesting the Vietnam War, exploded early in the morning, causing extensive damage but no injuries.
Are the 1915, 1971, and 1983 bombings of the U.S. Capitol Mandela effects for you? So why bombing? Is it possible that bombing an important location could destroy its grid? Many of you watching this episode may be familiar with a concept called grid working. This is a process where your higher self may be skilled at grid work, and when you go to certain locations, your higher self can connect energetically and repair that grid. If bombing a structure can destroy its grid, that means that the grid has to be restored with rituals or some type of grid working. The next question is, who is rebuilding that grid? And are they restoring it 100% to what it was before? Or are details in the grid being replaced with grid data that was not there before? Perhaps to give the appearance the grid was repaired, but hidden defects are included that could later cause the grid to fail or serve another purpose. Like a bridge repair crew using inferior parts that could make the bridge fail in the future. Like an airplane being repaired with inferior parts that can make the aircraft unstable and even crash under certain circumstances. I wanted to bring this to your attention so that you understood the concept that there is a lot more at play when bombing important structures and locations are involved, especially if you want to change history. Why? Because the wars of the future will be fought in the past. Can't be, but somehow is.